outstanding modernists, playwrights, satirists, poets. How is that such a small island as Ireland has given the world so many distinguished writers? Perhaps the answer lies in the Irish people's special relationship with the written word, or perhaps it lies in the voice of the island itself. Ireland is an island with a population smaller than that of many of the world's major cities, yet this has not prevented several Nobel Prize winners in literature and authors of books that have shaped world culture from being born here. Why here, of all places? The renowned Irish writer and playwright Roddy Doyle, who is also a Booker Prize winner, said, Dublin is a city where words hold a special value, and when you walk through its streets, it feels as though the voices of writers have not yet fallen silent. History shows us that the Irish began to regard literature as part of their national identity very early on. Here we are at Trinity College, Ireland's oldest university. It was here that Jonathan Swift, Oscar Wilde, and Samuel Beckett studied. Standing here, it's easy to forget that this is just an ordinary university, and I've always dreamed of seeing its old library. Even now, its archives contain the manuscripts of authors whose works are read all over the world today. This is probably why literature has never been regarded as something elitist here. Dublin's writers did not simply live in the same city. They formed a community that was often fraught with conflict, where constant creative rivalry reigned. It was not uncommon for writers to frequent the same establishments, where they discussed politics and art and critique each other's works. Some of the venues where this discussion took place are still in use today. For example, James Joyce knew many of the writers of his time and often criticized them for their provincialism. He debated with William Butler Yeats about what Irish literature should be like and with Samuel Beckett about the aesthetics of writing. It was through such simple debates between extraordinary individuals that a literary legacy was forged, thanks to which the city holds the honorary status of UNESCO City of Literature. For Ireland, literature has never been merely a form of entertainment. There is another interesting point. They wrote in English, but their English sounds different from that spoken in England. Their culture found its way into the English language through the distinctive rhythms, grammar, and metaphors of the Irish language. Through literature, the Irish debated politics, remembered their history, and sought to understand themselves. Swift used satire to criticize British politics and and defend Ireland's interests. If it's been a while since you read his Gulliver Travels, let me remind you that the book consists of four parts. Two of them, The Journey to Lilliput and The Land of the Giants, are widely known, but there are two other parts that are less well known. In this, Swift criticized his English neighbors quite harshly, and you'll be surprised at how little has changed in the people Swift described many years ago. William Butler Yeats and other leading figures were at the forefront of the Irish literary revival. Interestingly, most of the figures in this movement wrote in English. Yet at the same time, they deliberately reintroduced Celtic myths, Gaelic imagery, and ancient legends into literature. This created a peculiar paradox. The English language became a tool for preserving Irish culture itself. When I saw this tattoo, I was surprised that James Joyce wasn't depicted lying on his stomach. That would have been entirely in keeping with Irish humor. For when Joyce was writing Ulysses, he was suffering from poor eyesight, had undergone more than 10 eye surgery. He used to write in this position using large sheets of paper and bright red pencils. It is interesting that even Ireland's most radical modernist, James Joyce, did not reject the myth. On the contrary, Joyce took the plot of the ancient Odyssey and transposed it to an ordinary day in Dublin. Look at these hills, at the Atlantic Ocean, at the ever changing light. It was this very landscape that William Butler Yeats called the source of his inspiration. When you see something like this, you understand why people take up writing in the first place and why Yeats's poetry was born here. The west of Ireland is a place where the voice of nature is no quieter than that of people. Yeats believed that every part of nature, a hill, a lake, or a forest, bears traces of ancient Celtic myths and beliefs. And here it is worth mentioning one important thing. Long before the advent of novels and printing presses, Ireland was already steeped in stories. These were told by bards, druids, traveling storytellers. Legend of St. Patrick, the fairies, and King Lear's children were passed down from generation to generation, even at a time when most of Europe had no written literature of its own. It was to this tradition that Yeats was returning. If you just look at the map, it's just a mountain. But for Yeats, it was a place where history, nature, and mythology came together. In Ireland, almost every landscape like this has its own legend. Seamus Heaney described this 14th century Norman tower as the most important building in Ireland. It is situated in the historic region of County Galway in the west of the country, and it's a hub of history, poetry, and idyllic beauty. It had long been William B. Yeats's dream to build a house in the west of Ireland. At the time, the building was empty and derelict, and he bought it for just £35. Following its restoration and renovation, the poet and his family spent many summer holidays here. Due to the constant damp, they were unable to live here in winter, but Yeats's wife could often be seen fishing from the tower. She would cast her line from the window straight into the river flowing nearby. It is strange to realize that all these people once walked through this very courtyard. Later, the poet wrote some of his most beloved works here and made the tower his enduring symbol. Its features in many of his poems and the collections The Tower and The Winding Stair were directly inspired by its existence. So, what is it about the landscapes of the west of Ireland that so many people find so appealing? Cool Park is a prime example of this. It may come as a surprise, but there are a great many places in Ireland that have their own legends. Almost every lake, hill, or rock is linked to a story of some kind. After traveling across the island for a long time, you begin to realize, for the Irish, the landscape was never merely nature, it was a book that everyone knew how to read. The west of Ireland has gifted writers with its natural beauty, and while the voice of literature rang out loudest in Dublin, in Belfast it was often drowned out by history. It is impossible to understand Irish literature without considering the history of the island itself. For almost 8 centuries, Ireland was under English rule. Following the Reformation, a religious divide was added to the mix. The majority of Irish people remained Catholic, whilst the English authorities were Protestant. The conflict did not end in the Middle Ages. Its echoes could still be seen on the streets of Belfast at the end of the 20th century. Then came the Great Famine. Entire villages were deserted. Many of them never recovered. In the space of a few years, Ireland lost millions of people. Some died, whilst others were forced to leave their homeland for good. The island's population was almost halved. And in the 20th century, the country endured a war for independence, the partition of the island, and decades of violence in Northern Ireland. Incidentally, at almost the same time as Ukraine was fighting for its own statehood and the right to speak its own language, Ireland was following a very similar path. Perhaps that is precisely why it is so easy for Ukrainians to relate to so many chapters of Irish history. The struggle for one's own language, memory, and the right to determine one's own future sounds very familiar to us. When you look at all this together, you begin to understand why for the Irish literature has become more than just an art form. Sometimes it seems that the history of Ireland is the story of a people who time and again have lost their home, their language, or their nation, but have never lost their ability to tell stories. In such circumstances, literature became a way of understanding themselves and also a way of not losing themselves. When the language of most books became English, writers began to infuse it with a completely different experience, the experience of Irish history, memory, and culture. The renowned writer C.S. Lewis was born in Belfast. People remember his Narnia as a children's fairy tale, but they forget that Lewis was a brilliant thinker, teacher, and literary scholar. He had a knack for explaining very complex ideas in simple language. This, incidentally, is one of the most difficult skills for a writer to master. Why we do sometimes need fairy tales to talk about the truth? It seems this too is a legacy of a very ancient tradition. In Ireland, stories were never merely a form of entertainment. People used them to make sense of the world long before books were first written down. When talking about Belfast and the west of Ireland, it is impossible not to mention another Nobel laureate, the one closest to us in time, Seamus Heaney. To understand what sort of person he was and what his poetry was about, I think the following episode is quite telling. When the news broke that he had been awarded the Nobel Prize in 1995, Heaney was in Greece with his wife, and no one, neither his children nor the reporters, could get hold on him to share the good news. Upon learning of the Nobel Committee's decision, Heaney, when asked how he felt about being inducted into the Irish Pantheon alongside Yeats, Beckett, and Shaw, replied, "It's like being a little foothill at the bottom of a mountain range. You hope you just live up to it. It's extraordinary." Seamus Heaney was much closer to the modern person than one might think. His poetry required no knowledge of either Celtic mythology or complex symbolism. He wrote about the land, his father, work, memory, and childhood. It's a very human poetry. We are leaving Belfast. And finally, the only thing we can ask him is, which comes first, great literature or troubled history? For the most people, it's just a road sign. For me, it has become a reminder that a country can speak two languages at the same time. Almost all road signs in Ireland are bilingual English, Irish, two voices of one country. Most people use English on a daily basis, but the presence of Irish is a constant reminder that this culture is far older than the modern state. And perhaps that is precisely why even English language Irish literature sounds different. I came to Ireland with a question. Why the small island with a population of around 7 million people, including Northern Ireland, given the world so many great writers? And it seems there is no single definitive answer. Everything has come together here. A long tradition of storytelling and a dramatic history, extraordinary landscapes, a strong education system, and a special appreciation for the written word. In Ireland, stories have never existed solely in books. They have lived on people's memories, in the language, in the landscapes, and even in the silence of ancient ruins. Perhaps that is why it seems as though the island itself is still speaking, and if you listen more closely, you can hear its different voices. The voice of books from Dublin, the voice of the land in the west, the voice of history in Belfast, and the voice of language on these roads, but they tell the same story.